Michelle Y, who plays the daughter, is great as well. And I think that she's, in my opinion, gives the best performance in the film, because I think that's the performance that becomes the emotional anchor of the film. I think
you're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit.
Hey James, it's Chinese New Year, and I know we're getting ready to review The Last Dance, but well, you can see my Chinese New Year decorations.
very
But
nice.
on our YouTube channel, it talks about how an Englishman and an American get together over a drink and review movies, and we rarely actually ever drink. And because it is Chinese New Year, and I have the day off today, even though it's a Monday morning, I don't want to start drinking on a Monday morning. But what can you do? A Bloody Mary.
Oh,
So I
nice.
have. Excuse me a minute while I pour myself.
No, that's impressive, because it is first thing on a Monday morning that we're recording this, and so
It
some of us
is.
have some kind of
Look,
professional obligation. Oh, look at that! So that's a Virgin Mary, is it, or is that
no.
fantastic?
No.
Okay,
This is I'm on vacation, Bloody Mary.
wow,
So
at 10 a.m. Okay, good for you. Well,
that's when Bloody
cheers.
Marys are drank. Yeah.
I
Whoa.
know you're not
No.
supposed to cheers with water, but cheers. You can pretend it's gin if you want, but
Mm.
well, yeah. Happy New Year, Happy Year of the Snake, and all the rest of
Yeah.
that. So yeah, we did think it was about time that we talked about Ansel Chen's The Last Dance, which did open in Hong Kong back in October, but has since just continued to gain momentum, drawing the crowds. It's even now competing with the big sort of Chinese New Year movies that are on right now, and sometime in December, if memory serves, it broke the record to become the biggest box office champ in terms of local Hong Kong movies at
Mhm.
the Hong Kong box office.
Let me just start by saying I loved this movie, and I'm kicking myself for not having gone to see it earlier. In fact, a number of my friends, both Chinese and Western, here in Hong Kong, you haven't seen it yet? Didn't you love that movie? And we would talk about it. It's Chinese New Year. We were at a dinner the other night, and some of my Chinese and Western friends were sitting around, and we were talking about the film and how much we enjoyed it and liked it. Um, like you said, this movie's been out for 4 months, and I
Mm.
was at the cinema the other day. I mean, I just watched it this week. And granted, it wasn't a full house, but for a movie that's been out 4 months, there was a good 30, 40 people in the cinema. And it was wonderful to experience together. I'm so glad I didn't wait for it to come out on Disney Plus or something to see this in a film with kind of local Hong Kong Chinese. And of course, towards the end, very emotional ending, I could start to hear the sniffles and
Yeah.
and so I was really happy that I watched it in that environment.
I think that makes all the difference, because, I mean, one of the responses you hear repeatedly, and you get it from time to time, but it's happened a lot with this movie, is, oh, did you get it? Did you understand it? Because it is very culturally specific, but when a culturally specific story is told well, it becomes incredibly accessible and incredibly universal. This is a stumbling block. If I'm going to get into like one of my bugbears straight off the
Yeah.
bat, is I frequently come up against this kind of criticism when I'm reviewing an Asian movie normally
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
from people from that country, or of that ethnicity, or from that community, and they're like, yeah, but you wouldn't understand it because. And
Yeah.
I always find that slightly insulting, because it's not rocket science. It is, these are all human stories, human relationships. And yeah, there are tiny little specific peccadillos about different cultures and different societies. But I mean, I watch French movies all the time. I watch Italian movies all the time. I watch Brazilian movies, and I'm not from there, and I've never been. It doesn't matter. If the story is being told well and the characters are being sufficiently well drawn and performed, you get it, and you're able to just grasp the concept past those little specificities. So it's like, are you familiar with all of these things? No. Do you understand it? Yes, of course I do, because I am a person and these are people too. And I found that there was a little bit of pushback against me having an opinion on this movie, even towards the end, because they're like, oh yes, but it's so specific to Hong Kong and Hong Kong culture. It's like, yes and no. It's about Taoism and Taoist priests and those funeral rites and rituals. And you're like, yes, those are fairly unique to Hong Kong, and you don't experience those elsewhere. However, what it's really about is family, and I am from a family, and
Yeah.
it's as simple as that.
Yeah, no, I got the same pushback from a couple of friends that are Chinese saying, "Oh, I wasn't sure you'd get the cultural, specifics of it as you mentioned." I said, "Oh, so really, like, as a Westerner, I have no understanding of a patriarchal priesthood that doesn't allow women in and
Right.
has fostered a religious, legacy of keeping women and conservative values at yeah, I would be totally unfamiliar with that.
Yeah, exactly. I think people tend to be more sort of forgiving of it if you liked the movie, but it's when if you
Mhm.
didn't like it, they're like, "Well, you didn't get it. That's why you didn't
Right.
like it." And it's
Yeah.
like, "No, no,
Yeah.
no, no,
Well,
no. I got
fortunately,
it."
I love this movie. And
Right.
here's the thing is I've lived here for 35 years. You've lived here a long time. I don't for a
Yep.
minute claim to understand totally Chinese culture, but I've invested enough into this city where I at least can have an opinion without too much blowback. And one of my defenses is I've got a lot of Chinese friends that don't understand Chinese culture either. Like they're often as naive and ignorant about certain aspects of their own culture as I, as an American, can be ignorant about American culture. But there
Yeah.
is, I mean, and not to digress too much, but I have had that experience where, and I'll just give a quick anecdote. I remember being with a couple Chinese friends one time, and I mentioned how much I enjoyed seeing Cui Jian one time, one of the godfathers of Chinese rock and roll. And as I started talking about just not that I'm a huge fan, but I've had some experience and seen him live once in Beijing many many years ago. One of my Chinese friends said, "I'm so embarrassed as a Chinese person that this foreigner knows more about Sui Jian than I do." And I thought, it's kind of a unique thing to the Chinese people because if a Chinese person said, "Oh, I'm a big Bob Dylan fan," and started rattling off Bob Dylan facts, I wouldn't think, "Oh gosh, I've let down the American people because this Chinese
Right.
person knows more
Right.
about Bob Dylan than I do." It's kind of, unless you've been here and experienced kind of the insular nature that a lot of the Chinese culture has within itself, it's kind of hard to explain it to the outside.
Well, it's a bit like, I mean, you're such a great sort of Anglophile to the point where you know more about certain intrinsically British things than I do. And it's kind of like, well, I take them for granted and have moved away, kind of thing, and
Mhm.
pay less attention. Whereas
Sure.
for you, you're a fan of this stuff, and so you dive in head first and you pay attention to all the details and you dig up all of the facts and figures and all of that kind of thing. And I and so, you have to kind of be reminded sometimes. It's like, oh yeah, well then you're gonna know more about it than me because I take it for granted in that regard, or it's just that's an
Yeah.
element of my culture that I've just chosen to ignore or forget or just dismiss or whatever. But yeah, no, it's something that you come up against again and again and again, and it's like, no, I am not Chinese. Okay, but I've lived in Hong Kong nearly 25 years. My wife is Hong Kong Chinese, and she has a father who is Hong Kong Chinese, and this is a story about fathers and daughters as much as it's about anything else. And I have immersed 15 years of my life living with a Chinese woman who has a Chinese father, and I've observed that dynamic. Not saying that it's the same in any way, but there are certain sort of overlaps in as much as there are certain overlaps with any father-daughter relationship or father-son relationship or just any family dynamic. And that's my point at the end of the day. It's a movie about family dynamics and a patriarchy, like you said, which exists everywhere.
Let's dive into how much I really did genuinely love this film. I kept asking myself while I was watching it, James, why has this resonated so much with the Hong Kong, particularly Hong Kong Chinese people? And I started thinking, and I've shared this with a couple of my local friends, and they pretty much concurred with this, is that Hong Kong identity is a complicated thing because of the nature of Hong Kong. Being British for so many years, and probably half of Hong Kong still lived in a time where the British were here, but they were never British.
Mm.
But they always had a complicated relationship with China and maybe their Chineseness. And over the years, it's what is the Hong Kong identity? Who are we as a people? And obviously, as they're part of China, there is kind of a pressure both overtly and subvertly to kind of get with the program and identify with China, and which a lot of them, of course, are doing naturally. And yet there still is an identity within Hong Kong, and no different than a New Yorker with America or a Londoner with the UK. I mean, there are dynamics within Hong Kong that are not shared outside in the Chinese diaspora. Diaspora? Diaspora.
Diaspora.
Diaspora, thank you. And so what I thought in this film was it really was able to highlight some unique characteristics of Hong Kong Chinese culture. And I think for that reason we got a little bit of blowback's too strong a word. These were friendly comments to me.
Sure.
But it was
Yeah.
like, did you truly understand this, Steve? And yeah, by and large, I did.
Sure. I mean, what I like about the film is it starts off being kind of about one thing and then it becomes something about another. Just to set it up for anybody who hasn't seen it, it stars two of the biggest comedians in Hong Kong in basically dramatic roles, Dayo Wong and Michael Hui, who's been obviously around for decades and decades and is making something of a kind of comeback right now. So Dayo Wong plays a guy called Dominic, who is a wedding planner, and he's ironically sort of experiencing some pressure to get married from his sort of pregnant girlfriend as well. But due to COVID and the economic downturn, he's had to sort of shift his focus. His business is going down the pan, and his girlfriend suggests, "Oh, well, my uncle is retiring, and he is a part owner of a funeral service business. So why don't you take that over from him?" And so Dominic comes in with all of his newfangled kind of ideas, his very sort of commercial, sales heavy ideas that he has from the wedding industry, and he brings them over, and he brings his young team of sort of dynamic salespeople over to the funeral business, and completely sort of revamps how they approach customers and how they deal with customers, whatever. He immediately butts heads with the other partner, who is the Taoist priest who handles the actual ceremonial side of things, who is called Brother Man or Father Man, or there's a joke about him being called Hello Man,
Hello, Man,
which
yes.
which also is a kind of pun on the fact that he's so unfriendly and so much of a curmudgeon, and he is
Until
really
we find out what Hello Man actually means, but we'll get there.
Sure. And so they immediately butt heads. He is obviously entrenched in the ceremony and the tradition and the old way of doing things. It's all about respecting the ancestors and the ceremonies themselves, the rituals themselves. Particularly, it's called the breaking the gates of hell is one of the particular rituals. Which is what the Chinese name of the movie is as well, it should be pointed out. And he is so focused on that part of it that one of the major falling outs he ends up having with everybody is that he is more concerned about the well-being of the dead, and ensuring their
Right.
safe passage through to the next life than with the living, with the bereaved, with the families and all the rest of it. And, where Dominic's, sights lie, obviously. And this obviously has wider reaching repercussions because it's impacting Brother Man's entire family as well. He's forced his son to kind of come into the business as his protege, who has no interest in doing it whatsoever, while conversely his daughter, who is invested and interested in following this path, is not allowed to because she's a woman, and it's as simple as that. And they're dirty, they menstruate, so therefore they are they are completely they're not even allowed to touch his vestments or anything like that. And so she has become a paramedic and is living a very lonely, unfulfilling, romantically and otherwise, life on the night shift as a paramedic. And so that's this kind of and so Dominic unwittingly stumbles into this complete shit show of a family business, is really what the film's about.
Yeah. I thought for the first half of the film, it could almost be a TV series where you have like a Grey's Anatomy is surrounded by the ins and outs of medical doctors working in a hospital with all these eccentric type cases and quirky cases they have to deal with. And I thought, this is basically what the first half of this movie is. There's different quirky requests are coming into the funeral home and how they navigate it. And I thought, they could turn this into a TV show. And then it kind of shifts in the second half and really takes on all those family dynamic elements that you're talking about, they really bring those elements to the head. They kind of lay the groundwork in the first half, and there's a lot of comedy and there's humor involved. And you mentioned it. I was wincing inside sometimes when the father would say, either directly to the daughter or in general where she could hear it. Women are dirty, women menstruate. That's why they can never be there, kind of untouchable. But I still love you, honey. And
Mm.
it's coming back to these dynamics of can a Westerner understand this? I come from Christian fundamentalism, where that patriarchy, and it's like women are equal except you're subversive, or you're submissive.
Yeah.
You have to. Eve is the one who created all the evil we have in the world because she took the apple first. There is this blame that is fostered on females,
Mm.
whether it's Western culture or Eastern culture. Dirty, menstruate, like everything would be clean if it wasn't for you women. There is this subtext that goes out in this film, and I could feel it as I was watching it.
Yeah, and that is incredibly sort of well explored and explained and laid out in the second half in incredibly sort of moving, subtle family dynamics. Because we are a spoiler show. What happens in the second half, really, and the reason why the film shifts its focus away from the business to the family is because Hello Man gets sick and he is no longer able to look after himself. And so he falls back on his daughter for support because his son has got sick and tired of him. His daughter still lives at home. And so she has to become his primary caregiver. And even then, even when she's helping him on and off the toilet and in and out of the shower and all the rest of it, even then he is pushing back, going, with all of these sort of
Yeah.
long held prejudices and beliefs, which are all about, oh, what would my ancestors say, and this is the way it's always been, and he's refusing to adapt to a changing situation. And I think that is an incredibly powerful metaphor for Hong Kong in many ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's you can't hang on to the past, but you also can't completely transform and jump into an entirely new sort of identity and way of thinking and frame of mind, etc. So it's about finding the balance and finding what's important for your identity and for the relationships that you're involved in order to preserve. Ultimately, I never thought I'd say this, but as Fast and Furious has taught us, family is what is most important.
Yeah, old ways are not necessarily the best ways, but you don't discard them simply because they're old. And this film does a wonderful balancing act of addressing societal issues that we got to move forward. We've got to progress. There are archaic, encrusted ideas that need to be broken up, like ground needs to be broken up if we're going to grow anything healthy, any crops, and yet maintaining. And the end does a beautiful job of doing this, where the daughter takes on the role of the priest. And it's not something, she's not poo-pooing it. This is, like you said, this is something she's dreamed of. And to be able to walk into the life that she was wired to be, it's whenever we as humans see people doing what they are wired to do, we resonate with that. And as she was doing the ritual dance, I was getting goosebumps. So, other people getting sniffly eyed, I was getting goosebumps. This woman is being released to doing what she's meant to do, and her brother is now got a renewed sense of the calling that he has. Like because he was forced into it, just like a British royal that doesn't want, I don't want to go this way. I want to go somewhere else, man. I want to do anything else but do what I have been forced to do my whole life. Suddenly, when he gets I won't say come to Jesus moment, come to Taoist moment, uh, where you think, wow, this is actually beautiful. This is an ancient and ancestral legacy that I'm allowed to be part of. And so not only the daughter has this wonderful moment, but the son as well, which was wonderfully played by Chu Pak Hong. I was unfamiliar with this actor, but he really brought a gravitas to that role of trying to navigate. I don't want this life. I'm willing to even be baptized Christian. There's almost this middle finger to the system. Like, I don't mind it. It's all doesn't mean anything anyhow, which obviously elicits sheer contempt from his father.
I, it's funny you touch on that moment because that's sort of one of the moments that really shows up a lot of contemporary Hong Kong thinking. Is that he gets baptized Catholic so that his son can get accepted into a Catholic school because they want their kid put their kid into a good school,
Yeah.
and then it doesn't work out anyway, and they end up kind of like changing tack and deciding to sort of go overseas. But he's willing to do that for the sake of his kid, and it also, yes, illustrates how little that all meant to him. Doing doing the tower stuff at first, or how how little he sort of respected it or acknowledged it. So yeah, no, it's a really interesting sort of balance of old and new that happens in an incredibly sort of organic way. With Dominic coming in as this kind of the audience's sort of surrogate, if you like. So we're quite familiar with seeing sort of the dynamic, commercially focused business mind of sort of contemporary Hong Kong, and I like how much fun the film has illustrating the similarities in business model between a wedding planner and a funeral planner. There's a lot of superficial overlap, but also about sort of caring for the family, and you're able to tailor the ritual and the ceremony to your individual needs. And he keeps putting his foot in it and doing things wrong and upsetting Master Man for various reasons. And like you say, there are lots of interesting sort of vignettes with the different clients that come through who want very particular things, and him in the very sort of like customer first, people pleasing kind of approach that he has. Is saying yes to absolutely everything because he's like, okay, money, money, money. We've got to make a successful business. But then he comes to learn to realize that actually there's a little bit more rigidity to it sometimes. So he discovers that there are more rules to follow, whereas finally Master Man learns that some of those rules can be broken or should be reassessed. Perhaps, and like you say, just because they're old doesn't mean they're right.
I want to highlight Dayo Wong too, because watching him, I love an actor that can bring both the humor and the drama at the same time. And he really continues this, idea that comedic actors shouldn't be regulated just comedies. You look at Jim Carrey, you look at Adam Sandler in Western films. These are guys that can do the buffoonery type comedies and then do a solid drama performance. And they kind of help break the mold of breaking down that barrier between the comedic and the drama. And so Dayo Wong, watching him, coming from a comedic background and yet navigate a drama, which has gone on to be the #1 grossing film in Hong Kong history, just speaks volumes. And to be honest, I don't know if I've seen another movie with him.
Okay. I mean, yeah, he's been around for a long, long time. I mean, he was in the previous record holder as well, which actually only came out a year earlier, Guilty Conscience, which was this big sort of courtroom drama, sort of big sort of it's kind of a big
I missed it. I didn't. Yeah.
And it's so he's been around for a long, long time, but he tends to sort of just do these comedies. I'm not hugely familiar with his back catalogue. I mean, Michael Hoy is even more so. He's one of the Hoy brothers who were just this huge sort of comedic powerhouse group in sort of the 70s and 80s. In the 80s, he was one of the biggest comedians in the Hong Kong industry. And then in recent years, age as much as anything, he didn't work for a long time, and then he kind of came back a couple of years ago, and he's really appreciating a kind of resurgence now, and this has been sort of the capper on all of that. But I think the performances across the board are fantastic. I think Michelle Y, who plays the daughter, is great as well. And I think that she's, in my opinion, gives the best performance in the film, because I think for so long she's just done sort of rom-coms and cop movies and stuff like that. She's been a bit of a sort of every woman, working, jobbing actress for so long, and she rarely has had the opportunity to really sort of stand out in anything. And here is a real opportunity.
Those dramatic muscles.
Exactly. And here, I think that's the performance that becomes the emotional anchor of the film. I think you start the film with Dayo Wong's character, but you end the film with her character. And so if she doesn't land that, then I don't think the emotional gut punch of the film lands, and I think she's fantastic in it. But I don't think anybody really puts a foot wrong. I think it's a great sort of all round ensemble. I mean, what has been
But
interesting,
yeah,
what has been interesting about the film is that it doesn't seem to have really garnered much sort of international traction. I think it actually premiered at the Hawaii International Film Festival, sort of early October, like a week or so before it played here, and may have had one or two other festival engagements. But it was really only when it started playing domestically in Hong Kong that it garnered traction and reputation. And I think it might have had a token. Actually, it did. It had a token release in the UK because I remember hearing Mark Kermode review it, and which very, very rarely happens. But I don't think it made much of a splash, to be honest. And I think if they have the opportunity, it would almost make sense to try and sort of re-release it now off the back of all of its sort of plaudits and acclaim, because I think it has the potential to do or to find an audience in the same way as. Do you remember the Japanese film Departures that came out about 15 years ago,
yeah,
which
I do.
is kind of about a similar idea? It's about a sort of the traditional funeral rituals in Japanese society. And that went on to win Best Foreign Film at the Oscars that year, beating out some really stiff competition. So I think people, even if they don't, and this is kind of sort of sidetracking a little bit, but I think it's relevant here, is I think it's sometimes these films that are very culturally specific and do go into the minutiae of some element of a very specific culture, that really find a home and that really resonate. If you look at the sort of the Chinese films that have historically done very, very well, sure, you got all like Jackie Chan, action comedies and all the rest of it, but also for every one of those, you've got like a Raise the Red Lantern or a Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon or something like that, where it's precisely the kind of cultural exoticism of the film that is the appeal, and that
Yeah,
actually
yeah.
draws international crowds who wouldn't normally even maybe watch a Hong Kong movie, who don't know
Well,
any of the actors and have never been and don't really appreciate or understand the society specifically. But it's fascinating and it's a learning experience. And I think that might actually going, what we started talking about people sort of saying, oh, you won't get it because it's so
yeah.
specific. I think that might actually be what attracts an international crowd to it.
Absolutely, because this film is very accessible, even though, like you said, it's very specific about certain cultural aspects of Hong Kong society. I mean, as I said earlier, I mean, I've been here for 35 years. My kids have all been born and raised here. I'm thoroughly invested here. I'm not a Chinese Hong Konger, but I'm a Hong Konger. So when I watch this film, it resonates with me. Not every aspect do I historically resonate with as a Westerner, but even as they're walking the streets, I know those streets. I can feel the hum of them. When they're having noodles in a shop, I've had noodles in a shop. I'm not coming from a complete, international, completely disconnected from this film. And so I can see if it resonated with me, I can really see why for a Hong Kong Chinese audience, because there are cultures all over the world. We love film at times for giving us the opportunity of a peek hole into that world. That's why we like to watch a lot of travel shows. Anthony Bourdain, it gives us a peephole into a world we don't inhabit. And so I encourage you, if you are a non-Hong Konger and you have the opportunity to see this film, do it because you will like it. It has enough of the everyday human story that we deal with of family and the patriarchy and tradition and religion and the things that all cultures pretty much wrestle with. But it is very specific to a specific city at a specific time and a specific place. So it gives you an opportunity to see what does Hong Kong look like? How are Hong Kong people grappling with their identity in 2025?
Yeah, and I think you landed right on the point there, is that if this movie is about anything, if it captures anything, it captures the mood of Hong Kong people in 2024 going into 2025. And it is this sort of identity crisis. It's like, who are we? Who are we affiliated with? Where do we belong? what does the future look like? And I know that a number of countries are going through that kind of sort of mental quandary right now. But for Hong Kong, it's been in our minds for a number of years now, and it is as pressing a concern as ever. And I think that a number of Hong Kong films that are coming out right around now, whether it directly or indirectly, are really wrestling with this idea of identity and an uncertain future. And for that reason, I think it is incredibly important and incredibly accessible.
James, what unit of measurement should we use to rate a grade out of 5, The Last Dance?
Oh gosh. Well, I mean, there are so many. I like the sword that he wields when he's doing the breaking Hell's Gates
Yes.
ritual.
Yeah. Hey, we all need to break a little hell. Let's do that. Okay. How many hell-breaking swords would you give The Last Dance?
I'm going to give it 4 out of 5. I think it's a really sort of sturdy, robust piece of work. As I said, it's got a lot of specificity to it, but a lot of accessibility to it. The performances are great. I think the story is really layered and powerful, and it fires on all cylinders. I don't think it's quite an unreserved masterpiece, but it's a really, really good piece of work, and I think people should seek it out.
Yeah, I'm going to give it 4.5 because I can give a half star. I just thoroughly loved this movie. I enjoyed it. I walked out with a big smile on my face. I came out of it more connected to the city that I have adopted as my own than I ever have before. And I got to share that experience with a cinema full of local Chinese who I know even before the lights came up, I was the lone Westerner sitting and I saw a few people looking at me and they're probably thinking, is he going to get this? Let me tell you, I got it. I loved it. 4.5.
You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit you would be. You ought to be in pictures. You're wonderful to see. You ought to be in pictures. Oh, what a hit you would be. You're